Recently, we picked up one of these Nissan VK56 engines and we tore it apart. And you guys saw that I was extremely impressed with this thing. How did the LS compete with this? This is so much better. What we have here is a forged steel, fully counterweighted crankshaft. This is like some race car stuff right here. And at the end of that video, we talked about doing a sloppy mechanics inspired swap with one of these engines. I'm talking stock bottom end, spend as little money as possible, and today we're going to reveal what chassis we're gonna put this thing in. So since we're doing a sloppy mechanics inspired build, I think it's appropriate that we put it into a Ford Fairmont. And before the end of today's video, we will not only have this thing running, but doing burnouts in the driveway. About like 4.5 pounds boost.
That's it.
Yep.
That thing makes power.
Alright guys, one of the first problems that we needed to solve on the VK56 is getting a decent transmission behind it. This is kind of a problem with almost any build out there. It's great when you can make the power, but if you don't have a decent transmission that will bolt up behind it, you're kind of dead in the water. If you guys remember a little while ago, we built this little adapter plate right here. This was intended to go from a Turbo 400 to a Vortec 4200. Well, we're gonna be doing the exact same process here, except we're going to a VK56. We're actually going to reuse this transmission since it already has the bell housing cut off of it. I noticed with the Nissans, they had a bell housing that unbolted from the engine, and that gave me an idea. Why don't we adapt this to a Turbo 400 and use the bell housing from the Nissan rather than having to get an adapter plate. So another problem that we have to solve is what are we gonna do to track the engine position? In other words, where are we gonna put our crank sensor? Now, Nissan put the crank sensor here on the bell housing. It's actually right down here in this location right here. And if you guys watched our previous video, you know that the crank trigger is in the bell housing area. It's actually on the flex plate of the engine. So if we are able to run the factory bell housing, we can run the factory crank sensor with the factory crank reluctor, and then we don't have to buy a damper or something that can house a trigger wheel for us. So that's what we're gonna do. Alright guys, we're starting to figure out the engine mounts for the VK56 in the Fairmont. Now, we used to have the North Star in this thing, and the reason that we took it out was because, one, I wanted to put it in my 57, but two, I wasn't super happy with how the engine mount situation was coming out, and it was going to make our steering very difficult to work with. The VK56, on the other hand, is coming out really nice, and it's fitting into this Fox body chassis a lot better than what the North Star was. Instead of having to make this weird bridge around the steering and forcing us to install universals to get the steering around everything in the engine bay, we're going to be able to make these very simple shelf style mounts on the K-member, and we should be able to use the original mounts that go on the side of the block on the VK56. So we're going to get these welded into here, and this should solve our mounting situation. We will have to adjust our lower oil sump on the bottom of the engine. We'll have to make something a little bit lower profile in this area just to give ourselves a little more ground clearance. But overall, this engine is fitting a whole lot better than what the North Star was, and I think we made the right choice. All right, so here's what I came up with. What we have here is two plates that I had cut out for me by the guys over at Send Cut Send. And then I ordered these spacers. They are 1 3/4 in length. And we are basically going to fabricate our own lower oil sump. So how this works is it will seal up against the oil pan with this flange right here. And we got to make sure that no oil is able to leak out of any of these areas here. So in order to have a sump that is expanded outside of the oil pan rail, we need to put these bosses down through the middle of the oil pan, and we need to weld up all of the areas where oil could get out. This is a very common oil pan construction design in like big block Chevys and small block Chevys, where you have a kick-out style sump and you want to obviously be able to bolt it to the engine. So I have to get my torch down in these areas here and weld all the way around on all of these bolts. So let's get to work on that. Now, the idea with this sump is that we get our oil capacity back along with a little bit more, and we have our lower profile design so that we can get the ground clearance that we need. We are big fans of having a little extra oil capacity in a drag car, just because if any of the oil gets trapped up in the engine, you have a little bit left in the sump that you can, obviously supply the engine with. We will also have to rework our pickup tube. The pickup tube flange is about even with the pan rail, so we'll have to make a little tube here and a little pickup. We're probably going to harvest something off a small block or a big block Chevy, so we will have to work that out as well. But let's get this thing welded up so that we can get ourselves the ground clearance and the oil capacity that we need on this car. Number of loop-de-loops. I'd have to watch it again, but it seemed like there might have been a few too many. For the turbo kit on this car, we decided to do it sloppy mechanic style and just reuse the original manifolds. Now, I will say that I think these exhaust manifolds are very prone to cracking. The first VK56 that we picked up had lots of cracks in the exhaust manifold, so make sure that if you guys are duplicating this effort, that you give your manifolds a thorough inspection. We're a big fan of Matt over at Sloppy Mechanics, and we love his style of builds, where he just takes the engine from the junkyard, reuses as many parts as possible, and tries to make the most amount of horsepower with as little invested as possible. And as you guys saw in the last video, we tried to do that with the engine as well. It is a stock rod and piston engine. We didn't even bother to take the heads off of the engine to gap the rings. Literally the only thing that has been upgraded on this thing is what you guys saw in the last video. We put a set of upgraded oil pump gears in this thing from our friends over at Boundary Racing Pumps. So now that we had the turbo kit all fabbed up, it was time to install our turbocharger. And for that, we went with the guys over at Forced Performance. This is one of their 7875 turbos with a open T4 96AR, and we decided to weld the wastegate flange off the side of the turbo, as you can see down here, and with a few other modifications, here is what we ended up with. Now, the goal with this build is to do a foot brake combo, and we're shooting for right around 700 to 800 wheel horsepower with this build. Now, turbo sizing is a bit of an art. You want to go with something that's big enough to accomplish your goals, but you don't want to go too crazy big that it's hard to get the thing to spool. And I think that this 7875 from the guys over at Forced Performance is the best of both worlds. We should be able to make all the horsepower that we want to make and then some, and it should spool just fine. But we'll have to see how it performs, and you'll see that later in the video when we do our driveway test. With the engine mounted and the turbo kit made, it was now time to build ourselves a wiring harness. And we need to talk about what ECU we are going to run on this. Now, the wiring harness is a lot of the original wiring harness on the VK56. We just recycled a lot of it. All of the factory routing here is actually how the factory had the wires routed on the engine. I didn't want to get too complicated with this one. I basically just took all of the wiring, unsheathed it, and I recovered it with this nice braided sleeving here and hooked it up to the appropriate locations on the Link ECU. Now, the ECU that we are using in particular is a Link G4X Extreme ECU, and maybe in a future video I'll do a more in-depth review of what I think of that product. But for now, I gotta say that it's running the engine quite well. There's a lot that I'm still getting used to with the ECU. The interface is definitely a little more different to what I am used to, but you know, we're making headway. The guys over at Link ECU offer native support for the VK56 engine. All you need to do is hit the drop down and configure it for a VK56, and it should just plug in and work. So earlier in the video, you heard me talk about how we're going to adapt the VK56 original bell housing to the Turbo 400. And we pretty much finished up with that solution. But I kept running into a problem when I was trying to figure out how we were going to adapt the 3-bolt torque converter to the VK56 flex plate, which is a 4-bolt design. Now, we've welded lug nuts to a torque converter in the past and had decent success with it. Now, right about the time where this problem was starting to become a roadblock, where this kind of was the last thing that we had to figure out, I found something on the internet that solved our problem. So let's show it to you guys. And this is what I found. This is a kit to adapt the 4-bolt arrangement on the VK56 flex plate to a 3-bolt style converter. Actually, it's set up for a 6-bolt, an LS style of torque converter, but we are only going to use 3. And another one of our concerns with the factory flex plate was how thin this metal is here. We were worried that this metal here would not be substantial enough to be able to hold the horsepower. So when I saw this kit, it seemed like something that would solve both of our concerns and make it so that we can adapt to a 3-bolt torque converter. So how this works is this actually bolts down and sandwiches the factory flex plate onto the crankshaft itself, and then this becomes the part that is now load bearing, if you will. Then you take this ring here and it bolts to your torque converter. The only problem with this solution is it has these little nuts welded on the back, which are used to fasten it to the flex plate once you actually install it in situ. But if your torque converter has a flat face like this one does, these nuts don't have room to sit behind here. And you can't really go modifying the torque converter, adding recesses, because it would create an uneven distribution of mass. And you know, it's going to shake itself to death. Because of that, we had to explore other solutions. And we picked up this torque converter right here. You'll notice that the feet on the converter are proud of the actual billet face of the torque converter. And this allows us to bolt this down flat, and it gives room for the nuts to exist. It does have the appropriate torque converter pattern, as you can see here, and this will allow us to adapt the flex plate to the 3-bolt design on a typical GM. Now this kit is offered by the guys over at C3 Performance, and I gotta say huge thanks to those guys over there. And he offers the kit with just the flex plate converter, but when I reached out to him, he actually suggested that we go with his entire swap kit in order to make sure that all of the spacing was correct. So we're actually going to be using his bell housing conversion plate as well. This is a 5/8 thick piece of aluminum that is designed to go from the VK56 bell housing flange layout to the small block Chevy, or typical Chevy arrangement. Now, as I said earlier in the video, we're trying to retain the factory trigger wheel and the factory crank sensor. Well, he's also thought about that as well. There's a little block that actually bolts onto this surface right here, and it takes the factory crank sensor so that you can use your factory trigger wheel and you don't have to get a fancy aftermarket damper to house the trigger wheel up front.
When we started putting this together, one of the things that we noticed is that the bolt pattern that is usable is for an LT/LS style bell housing. One of the challenges that we're facing is that the small block, big block bolt pattern has 2 bolts that overlap the Nissan. So what we're going to do is use a blow-proof bell and then drill some holes here in a different position so that we get that clamping there, because we can't use this top one. With these two and an LS style bell housing, you wouldn't need to do that. Just something to take into consideration. Not too bad.
The guys over at C3 Performance have really thought of everything. Normally the starter bolts come in from the rear and the starter is threaded. Well, with their kit, the bell housing adapter plate is in the way, of course. So they came up with this little plate here, which basically just drops into the back here and basically makes it so that you can drill out the threads in the starter and run the bolts in from the front. Frankly, this is a better arrangement. You don't have to make sure that you have clearance in your firewall to get the bolts from the back. Frankly, that's kind of a stupid design anyways. So this will, one, solve that kind of poor engineering choice, if you ask me. And it will allow us to bolt the starter in and nothing will foul with the adapter plate. All right, guys, this is our first mock-up of the torque converter. And just to give you guys an idea of how tight it is, that is how much space there is for the fastener that goes into the torque converter. So we now have a torque converter that will bolt to the factory flex plate. So we finally solved the problem. Big thanks to C3 Performance. They have made this conversion one heck of a lot easier. And I highly recommend that if you are going to put a GM transmission behind your VK56, you use their adapter kit. Another thing that we need to talk about is the cooling setup. Now, this is going to be a drag and drive car, so we opted for a radiator that was on the larger side. And we also worked with the guys over at Burn Down Garage and use one of their Silverado brushless fan holder kits. We are running one of these on just about every single one of our drag and drive cars. There's one on there. There is one on the Sunbird that we won the Sick Week Freaks class, and we're a big fan of their products. And while I'm talking about the fan, they've recently made a few improvements to the fan. You can see right here, they've added this little cutout on the ring. There really is no need for this portion of the fan. The blades are much further down inside of the shroud. So they've recently improved the Silverado fan kit to give you as much clearance as you need in order to fit it into your chassis. And I also have some more exciting news. The guys over at Burn Down Garage recently came out with a kit to mount up a 19-inch brushless fan from a Camaro ZL1. We've had excellent success with the 15-inch that you see right here. The radiator that is on the Sunbird is on the smaller side, and we never saw over 185 degrees Fahrenheit in hot summer conditions. But if the 15-inch is not good enough for you, they now offer a 19-inch version, which should give you all the airflow that you could ever possibly need. They are on pre-order right now. I will put a link down in the description. So if you guys are interested in getting a hold of one of the kits, go check them out. It's like the map sensor's not working, and
Paper towels by the ton.
holy crap.
Yeah, we got a problem.
Yeah, all the injectors maybe. Wow. How did that run? You may have noticed on that first startup that we were having a pretty significant amount of oil come out of the exhaust pipe here. You can still see a lot of the oil residue inside of the exhaust, and frankly, I've never seen that much oil come out of an exhaust pipe. Normally, you get a little bit. Frankly, we went a little undersized on our drain with this engine, but yeah, I think I found the actual problem. Do you see it? Do you see what the problem is? Yeah. Oops. So I think we need to pull that little plug out of there, and then this thing should be able to drain a whole lot better. We're still going to upsize it to a 12 AN line just because, but oops.
Alright, you put out a lot of smoke, but it didn't come out the tailpipe this time. That last one was all tailpipe.
Yeah, I got it on film.
But those tires make a lot of smoke.
They're pretty well dry rotted.
Yeah, but they've gone 140 miles an hour.
Like that?
Yeah. I wanted to win a race. I did.
About like 4.5 pounds boost.
That's it.
Yep.
That thing makes power.
Alright guys, I am pretty happy with this swap so far. I will say the Link ECU has been a little bit of a struggle to learn. It's definitely a different mindset from some of the other ECUs that I've used, but I am learning it. This thing runs and idles like a dream. I gotta say that turbo from Force Performance, that sucker lights off pretty fast. I love the way that it sounds, and now that we actually have proper oil return back into the engine, it doesn't smoke a bit. I gotta say a big thanks to Monkey Fab once again for the T4 merge flange, and of course to the guys over at Burn Down Garage for the Silverado 15-inch brushless fan holder kit. The adapter kit from C3 Performance worked beautifully, so I gotta say a huge thanks to them once again. We still have a few bits and bobs that we need to figure out on this combo, but we're getting down to the end, and the next time that you see it, it will be on the chassis dyno. I'm super excited to hear what this thing sounds like at high RPM, and to see how much horsepower we can get out of a stock bottom end. So make sure that you guys stay tuned in to the channel. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure you go watch some of our other videos that we made on the VK56. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. One last thing is I gotta say a huge thanks to John Rogers for inspiring this madness. We got to meet him at World Cup when we went to spectate, and I gotta say he is just an overall cool dude. He also makes YouTube videos, so you should go follow his channel as well. His channel is Ricer John. Go check him out.